Do you believe in angels? What if I told you that children can see them all the time? Today, I will share with you a real and surprising story of a mother who died because of 10 minutes, went to the other side, and discovered the truth about guardian angels. Before you start, comment here what city are you watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories like this. My name is Katarine Hawthorne. Until recently, I considered myself an ordinary woman. My world revolved around my husband, Michael, and our 5-year-old son, Elliot. I have always been practical, someone who believes in what I can touch, measure, and prove. But then I got pregnant with my second child, and it was as if an invisible door had opened inside me. It all started subtly, small signs, inexplicable sensations, the kind of thing that a rational person like me would quickly dismiss as coincidence. But Elliot, my oldest son, didn't ignore any of this. He understood everything. During the first few months of pregnancy, I felt strangely observed. It wasn't a fear, nor a discomfort. It was as if I knew, deep down in my soul, that I wasn't alone. I remember one specific night when I woke up at 3 a.m. for no apparent reason. The room was silent, only the moonlight filtering through the curtains, but there was something different in the air. One presence. It was a feeling of peace, but at the same time, overwhelming. How if something or someone was there, watching me? I looked to the side, where Michael was sleeping soundly, and tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just hormones. But then, Elliot started talking about his brilliant friend. Mom, can I tell you a secret? Elliot looked at me with those big, innocent eyes. I smiled. Of course, love. He approached, as if it were something serious. I have a friend. He is very handsome. He has wings of light. I stopped folding the baby's clothes for a moment. A friend? But only I see. My heart sped up a little. Children have imaginary friends. I knew that. But there was something different in the way Elliot spoke. And what is his name? Raziel. It was as if an invisible thread had pulled something inside me. Raziel? This was not a common name. I tried to hide my uneasiness and asked casually, "And what does he do?" "He protects me. And the baby, too." I felt a shiver down my spine. The baby. Elliot nodded, picking up a colored pencil and starting to draw on the paper. What he scribbled left me speechless. In the drawing, there were 3 figures. One was Elliot. Another, smaller one, was me, my rounded belly indicating pregnancy. But what really made me cringe was the third figure, Ira high, slim, and with immense wings, which seemed to radiate light. "This is Raziel," he said simply. "He told me that Ariel takes care of the baby." I crashed. Another name, another unusual name. Ariel? Yes, he is strong. He's protecting the baby because there's something bad trying to get to him. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean by that, Elliot?" He just shrugged and went back to coloring, as if he had said something perfectly normal. But I knew it wasn't normal, and with each passing day, the signs remained more intense. After that conversation, Elliot started drawing angels constantly. The drawings were detailed, far beyond what a 5-year-old would normally do. There were always figures luminous, with kind eyes, and wings made of something that looked like golden electricity. They stay close to us, Mom, but adults don't see it. One night, when Michael was at work, I sat down next to him and asked, "Elliot, does Raziel tell you anything about me?" He looked at me thoughtfully. "He says you need to be strong." "Why? Why something is coming?" My heart pounded. "What's coming, Elliot?" He sighed, as if he didn't know how to explain it. "It's just, you need to believe, Mommy." I couldn't sleep that night. Even without fully understanding it, a certainty grew within me. Something was about to happen, and nothing could prepare me for what came next. The days passed, and my pregnancy progressed without any apparent complications. But the feeling of omen wouldn't leave me. I felt like something was forming around me, like an invisible wave about to break. Elliot continued with his drawings and his enigmatic phrases. He talked about Raziel and Ariel as if they were part of our daily lives, and as much as I tried to keep my mind rational, something inside me told me he was seeing something real. Then, with just a week to go before my due date, things started to go wrong, get weirder. That week, I started having intense dreams. These were no ordinary dreams. In the first of them, I saw myself walking down a corridor of golden light. The walls glowed like liquid gold, and a soft sound echoed around me, like a choir of voices whispering something in a language I didn't understand. There was a huge door at the end of the hallway. When I tried to open it, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest, not of fear, but of anticipation. The next night, the dream returned, but now I was on the other side of the door. I was in a huge hall where luminous figures moved in silence, and then I heard a whisper close to my ear. "Get ready." I woke up panting. On the third night, one last dream. This time, I wasn't alone. A figure of light stood next to me. I couldn't see your face, but I felt your presence immense and powerful. He held my hand and whispered, "Don't be afraid. You will be brought back." I woke up with tears streaming down my face. I didn't understand what that meant, but I knew it wasn't just a dream. The following night, close to the baby's birth, Elliot did something that made me even more uneasy. We were on the couch, and he seemed restless, fidgeting as if trying to find the courage to speak. "Mommy, what happened, my love?" He took a deep breath. "Can I sleep at Aunt Claire's tonight?" That took me by surprise. "But why?" He bit his lip, as if he didn't know how to explain. "Because you're going to need help tonight." I felt my stomach sink. "What do you mean, Elliot?" "Raziel said that I'm better off not being here." His voice had no fear, just certainty. My heart accelerated. At that moment, I knew something was going to happen. I don't know why, but I agreed to his request. Michael took Elliot to my sister Claire's house, while I tried to ignore the chill that wouldn't leave me. A few hours later, around midnight, a pain overwhelming hit me. These were not normal contractions. It was an overwhelming wave of pain, as if my body was being forced into labor before the time. I screamed for Michael, and he found me bent over the bed, shaking. "Catherine, what it was? The baby! It's coming too fast!" Michael took the keys and helped me to the car. The pain came in violent waves, and in the back of my mind, I felt that there was something wrong. The car flew through the empty streets of Asheville as I clung to the dashboard, trying to breathe. And then, something even stranger happened. The car radio called alone, and static filled the speakers. "What the hell is this?" Michael muttered, trying to turn off the radio. But then, amidst the static, a voice echoed. It was low, almost a whisper, but perfectly clear. "Don't be afraid." Michael looked at me with wide eyes. I was frozen. By voice, it was the same as my dream. And then, the car turned into the hospital entrance. The fear, which had once been a shadow in the back of my mind, now became a certainty. I knew I was about to going through something much bigger than just the birth of my son. I was about to die. The hospital emergency room door opened with a bang as Michael helped me out of the car. The pain was unbearable, radiating from my belly like a crushing wave. "We need help!" he shouted. A nurse rushed over to us with a wheelchair, and everything became a blur of hurried movements and panicked voices. "Her blood pressure is dropping. Unstable heart rate." I felt my body being pushed into a delivery room, cold lights above me, surgical masks moving around me. A strange feeling took over my chest, a certainty that something was about to happen. Time seemed to dissolve. "Catherine, look at me," said Dr. Catherine Myers, my obstetrician. "You are in good hands. Let's bring your baby into the world." I tried to respond, but before he could open his mouth, everything around me turned white. There was no darkness. There was no tunnel. There was no fear. There was light. From one second to the next, everything I knew disappeared. I was still conscious, but no longer in my body. The first thing I noticed was the lightness. There was no pain. There was no weight. Just a feeling of peace absolute, something so pure that no words could describe it. I looked down, eyeing my own body, and what? The doctors were frantic. The heart monitor made a sound constant and sharp. Cardiac arrest. I was dead, but I didn't feel dead. I felt more alive than ever. As I watched the doctors work, I felt something shift around me. A golden light began to expand, filling the entire room. It was warm, vibrant, and filled with indescribable energy. Then I realized I wasn't alone. Behind the medical team, a colossal presence rose, a being of light. He was huge, with wings that seemed to be made of living flames, shining in shades of gold and white. Each beat of its wings caused the air to vibrate with powerful energy. It was then that I saw Shadow. In the corners of the room, something dark and twisted moved, trying to infiltrate, a presence oppressive and dense, something that didn't belong in that space. But before it could advance, the wings of the being of light expanded violently, and with a single movement, the shadow was dissipated. The hospital is gone. I went pulled to another place. The transition wasn't like walking through a door. It was like to wake up from a dream to a much more vivid reality. I was in a huge field, but not just any field. The ground seemed to be made of liquid, golden light, as if every particle glowed on its own. The sky had no sun, but everything was lit from the inside out. And then I felt a presence that carried the weight of infinity. When I turned around, he was there. I never knew how to describe the presence of Jesus until that moment. He didn't look like the paintings I had seen. It was light, a being of indescribable majesty, and at the same time, so full of love and tenderness that my heart seemed unable to contain. There were no words, but you knew that he knew me, what always met me. I felt his voice within my soul. You finally see it. Tears ran down my face. I didn't know why, but I cried. Why am I here? My voice came out as a thought, and yet he heard it. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he showed me. In my vision, I saw Elliot. He was sleeping, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, Raziel stood up. He was even bigger than the being I had seen at the hospital. His wings were infinite. His presence was like a wall of light. Then I saw my baby, inside my belly, surrounded by a luminous shield, protected by another angel, Ariel. Realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. My son always had a protector. All children he has. Elliot never imagined angels. He them via. My mind was spinning. Jesus spoke again, inside me. Children notice what adults ignore. But then, everything changed. The field of light trembled, and I saw it. On the other side of the veil, the shadows tried to cross. An invisible battle was going on, and I was in the middle of it. The light of the angels expanded, forming flaming swords in your hands. They moved with divine precision, pushing aside the shadows that tried to infiltrate them. My heart sank. If I didn't come back, who would protect my children? It was then that Jesus gave me the choice, and I looked back. I saw Michael. He was in the hospital waiting room, holding his hands over his head, his eyes closed, praying desperately. Elliot, sleeping under Raziel's protection. I saw my baby, being born at that exact moment, and I knew I needed to go back. Jesus' gaze was full of love. He didn't say anything, but the moment I made my decision, I was pulled back. The pain came back like an explosion. It was like falling from an infinite height. My body was overcome by an overwhelming shock, and then I felt the first breath of air fill my lungs again. The monitors beeped. "She's back," someone shouted. My chest hurt. My head was spinning, but I was Viva, and my baby, also. Elliot was right all along. I saw. Now I believed. My body felt heavy. Air entered my lungs as if I were relearning how to breathe. Every cell in my body vibrated, still feeling the transition between the two worlds. I heard voices around me, the sound of heart monitors, the cold touch of a nurse's hands pressing on my wrist. "She's back," pressure rising. My eyes slowly opened, and the first thing I saw was Michael. He was there, next to me, holding my hand tightly. His face was red, his eyes filled with tears, as if he had just come out of a nightmare. "Catherine, are you listening to me?" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I just shook his hand. It was then that I heard crying, high, firm, full of life. "The baby," I sobbed, my voice coming out weak. A nurse smiled and held out a small blue package. "Your son is fine." A true warrior. My eyes filled with tears. They placed him in my arms, and in that instant, an indescribable warmth enveloped me. He was so small, so perfect, but something inside me said he was never alone. Hours later, when everything calmed down, I was alone with my baby in the hospital room. Michael had left to call our family, and I finally had a moment to absorb everything that had happened. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. What I had experienced, it wasn't a dream. I've been on the other side. I saw, and then, as if someone had whispered inside my heart, a name came to my mind. Ariel. I opened my eyes and looked at my baby. Ariel was her guardian. I didn't know how, but I could feel your presence there, in the room. The energy was strong but gentle. It was like a warm breeze enveloping my son in safety. "You're here, aren't you?" I murmured. There was no audible response, but a chill ran across my skin, and my heart knew. He was. The next day we returned home. I was emotionally exhausted, but determined to talk to Elliot. When we walked in the door, he ran to hug me, but then stopped and stared at the baby in my arms. His eyes widened. "Mommy, Ariel is big. I crashed." "What?" Elliot pointed into space behind me. "He's right there. He has wings of fire." My heart raced. "Can you see him?" Elliot nodded, smiling. "He's happy. He says you finally believe." I collapsed onto the couch, holding my baby closer to my chest. I couldn't deny it anymore. Elliot always knew. That night, something extraordinary happened. I was lying in bed, holding my newborn son, when I saw Elliot standing in the bedroom door. He was completely calm, but his eyes sparkled in a different way. "Mommy, can you see now?" My heart accelerated. "See what?" He smiled, walked to the window, and pointed out, "The guardians." I got out of bed, still feeling weak, and went to him. I hugged my son and looked out the window. The street was silent. But then, my gaze began to change. On top of houses, on corners, on rooftops, there were shadows of light. Figures very high, with gigantic wings, hovered about every house. I couldn't see them as clearly as Elliot, but I felt them. A lump formed in my throat. Mom, they were always here. My eyes filled with tears. I knew it wasn't imagination. I knew that we were never alone. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt a kind of peace that I had never felt before. I understood. Children see what we choose to ignore. Time seemed to flow differently after my experience. I saw the world with new eyes, and each day revealed a new detail that had previously gone unnoticed. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. I was about to witness something I could never have imagined. Elliot tried to warn me, but I still didn't understand what was about to happen. It was a peaceful morning. Michael slept next to me, and my baby rested in his crib, breathing softly. Silence reigned, broken only by the faint sound of trees swaying outside. It was then that I woke up to a strange feeling, a deep restlessness, as if something wasn't right. I turned to my son's crib. He was fine, sleeping peacefully. But then I looked at the bedroom door and Elliot Parado Ali. His eyes were wide, but he didn't seem afraid. "Mom, they are here." My entire body shivered. "Who, Elliot?" He took a deep breath. "Those who want to enter." My heart stopped. "What do you mean by that?" He pointed to the window. "Look." I went to the window, hesitantly. The night seemed normal, no strange movements, but then a shiver fortissimo ran down my spine. Something moved in the shadows. They were not figures of light like the ones I had seen before. They were dark, twisted shapes that crawled down the street. They didn't walk like humans. They slid. They pulsed as if they were made of condensed black smoke. Fear gripped me. But before I could react, Elliot smiled. "They can't come in, Mom." My mouth went dry. "Why?" He pointed up. "Because they are here." I followed your finger and, for the first time, I saw clearly. At the top of our house, two colossal figures were standing. They were angels, but now I saw them more clearly. His wings were answered, stretched for meters. One of them held a sword of fire, and the light emanating from them was so intense that seemed to push the shadows away. That's when it happened. The dark shapes tried to advance, and in an instant, the angels moved. Time seemed to stop. Shadows advanced like a dark wave, trying to envelop our home. But the angels raised their swords. The light radiating from them cut through the darkness like a gust of wind. The shadows, they shouted, not a human sound, but a sound deep and cutting, as if something was being torn apart. And then, they were destroyed. The light won. The battle only lasted seconds, but it felt like I had just watched something epic and timeless. Elliot sighed beside me, as if he knew exactly what had happened. I told them they couldn't come in. My legs were shaky. I didn't know what to say, but in that moment, I understood something I could never ignore again. The spiritual world is real. There is an invisible battle happening every day, and we humans, we don't see any of that. Maz Elliot, Elliot Via. The next day, I was still processing everything when my son came to me with a new drawing. On paper, he had drawn the battle we had witnessed, the dark, creeping shadows, the immense angels with flaming wings, and in the center, our house, enveloped in light. They always protect us, Mom, but today they had to fight. I swallowed hard. Do they always do this? Elliot shrugged. All the time. I was silent. He looked me in the eyes. Now do you believe? I didn't need to respond. He already knew. That night, I was no longer afraid, because now I knew the truth. We are not alone. There's a war going on right in front of us, but most people you will never realize. Children see, angels fight, and God never abandons us. It doesn't matter how dark the world is, a light always wins. In the days following the battle I witnessed, my mind felt like it was in constant conflict. On the one hand, you knew, I saw, I felt it. There was no more room for doubt. The spiritual world was not a fairy tale. It was real. But on the other hand, how could I live normally after that? How could I go through life knowing that, around me, there were invisible forces in constant struggle? And more than that, why was I chosen to see all this? One night, when tiredness finally won and I fell asleep, I felt again that transition. It was no ordinary dream. It was like last time. I was in the same field of infinite light, where everything pulsed in harmony and peace. And then, he was there. Jesus. He looked at me as if he already knew everything I was thinking, as if he had been waiting for this moment. My heart pounded. Why me? I asked, my voice breaking. He didn't respond with words. He just reached out his hand and, suddenly, I saw my own life before me. It was like watching a movie, but each passing scene wasn't just a memory, it was a revelation. I saw moments when I almost had accidents, and at the last minute, something stopped me. I saw my childhood, the days when I felt an invisible presence but ignored it. I saw my adolescence, when I doubted everything and went on with my life as if God didn't exist. And then, I saw recent moments. The day Elliot was born, I was in the delivery room, but now, looking from outside, I saw Raziel there, standing, protecting my son from the first second of his life. The day I discovered my second pregnancy, Ariel was already there, watching over the baby before I even knew he existed. Every moment, every detail of my life, I was never alone. I was protected, guided, prepared. Elliot saw the angels because he still had the purity to see them. But now, I saw it too. Jesus then showed me something new. It was like a bridge, and on one side of it, my normal life before all this happened. On the other side, there was a different path. It was uncertain, but it was enveloped in golden light. He finally spoke, and his voice was like a river of love and authority. You have a choice. My chest tightened. What? Back to how it was before, or accept what has been shown to you? My hands were shaking. I understood. I could live as before, ignoring everything. I could convince myself that this was all just a passing experience, an illusion caused by the shock of birth. Or I could accept that I now knew the truth, and that would change everything. Before I could respond, he showed me one more thing. I saw my family in the future. I saw Elliot, now older, helping other children who, like him, saw beyond the veil. I saw my baby, still small, but with a special glow around him, as if he had an even bigger mission ahead of him. I saw Michael, sitting at the kitchen table, reading a Bible. He still didn't believe it, but one day, he would believe. And then I saw myself, talking to other mothers, consoling desperate parents who didn't know how to deal with children who talked about angels and lights. I wasn't preaching or trying to convince anyone. You just shared. And at that moment, I knew what I should do. I looked at Jesus, and he waited. He never would force me. The choice was always mine. I could forget, or could, to accept. I took a deep breath. I accept. He smiled, and in the blink of an eye, I woke up. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my room. The air felt thicker, as if I had been ripped from a place where everything was light and brought back to this world full of weight and uncertainty. But now, I knew the truth. Elliot was sitting on the edge of my bed, drawing. Good morning, Mom. I sat down slowly, still feeling the energy of the experience. Elliot, he smiled, as if he knew. You accepted, right? I swallowed hard. Did you know? He just nodded, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Raziel told me you would have to choose. I looked at the drawing he made. It was at Bridge, the same one I saw, and on the other side, the light. That day, I made my decision. I wouldn't be the same again. Now, I knew the world was very bigger than human eyes could see. Now, I knew that angels exist, that there's a battle going on every day, and that, even when everything seems lost, the light always wins. I woke up with a loud sigh, as if I had emerged from a deep dive. My heart was beating fast, my skin was cold, and I felt an indescribable heaviness in my chest, as if my soul was still adjusting to my body. The room was dark, lit only by the light from the lamp next to the bed. It took me a while to understand where I was. It was my home, Era, the physical world again, but something was different. I tried to move my arms and legs, but I felt absurd tiredness, as if every cell in my body had been ripped out and returned. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The memory was still fresh, the light field, the presence of Jesus, the choice. I knew I had returned because I chose to go back, but why did my body feel so heavy? It was then that the pain came. It was as if every muscle and every bone was being rekindled, forced to work again. It was a reality check. And, above all, I felt out of place. It was as if I no longer fit completely inside my own body. I tried to sit up in bed, but a strong dizziness pulled me back onto the pillow. Then I heard something. It wasn't a physical sound, Era internal, deep, like an echo inside my mind. You have returned, but there will be difficulties. The message came through clearly, but there was no fear in it. It was a warning. Adapting to the physical world, it wouldn't be easy. I wanted to respond, to ask what that meant, but before I could try, a hand touched my forehead. I opened my eyes, scared. Era Michael. He looked at me with concern, his face pale and tired. Katerine, are you okay? There was something in his eyes that I had never seen before. A deep fear, a fear of losing myself. I swallowed hard and tried to speak, but my throat was dry. Michael got a glass of water and helped me drink it. When I finally managed to whisper something, I asked, "What happened?" Michael closed his eyes for a moment, as if he was reliving something traumatic. You passed out. His body went into shock. His heart stopped for more than 10 minutes. My breathing hitched. Even knowing what had happened, hearing that in words was scary. Michael squeezed my hand tightly. The doctors said it was almost impossible for you to come back. But then, out of nowhere, you breathed again. As if something had pulled you back. I looked at him with tears in my eyes. Something pulled me back. Michael looked at me, confused. I knew I still wouldn't understand, but one day, he would understand. After Michael made sure I was okay, he finally fell asleep next to me, but I stayed awake. My mind was racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes from the other side, the light, the angels, and the battle. But now I was here, back to the physical world, and I knew I couldn't ignore what I saw. It was then that something happened. The baby stirred in the crib. Elliot appeared at the bedroom door, holding his blanket. "Mom, can I sleep here today?" I looked at him fondly and motioned for him to come. He climbed onto the bed and lay down next to me. After a few minutes of silence, he whispered, "I saw you leaving." My heart sank. "What?" He looked me in the eyes. "I saw you going to heaven." My skin crawled. Elliot sighed and rested his head on the pillow. "But Raziel said you would come back, because you needed to see everything first." I held her little hand. You knew. He always knew. The next morning, I woke up feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. I looked at Michael sleeping next to me, to Elliot, still curled up in the blanket, for my baby, breathing peacefully in his crib. I almost lost it all. I almost didn't come back. But now I was here. And I knew there was a reason for that. I was no longer the same person. Now I via. Now I believed. And now did you know that we are never alone. In the days following my return, my mind and heart were in a whirlwind of emotions. I felt like I had been reborn, but the world around me continued as if nothing had changed. The household routine, the commitments, the responsibilities, everything seemed the same, but I was no longer the same. And as time went by, I realized that I wasn't the only one who knew that. The afternoon after I returned, Elliot spent hours on the living room floor, scattering crayons and paper everywhere. He drew with impressive focus, his tongue slightly out, his little hands moving quickly. When he finished, he ran over to me and held the paper up, proud. "Look, Mommy." I picked up the drawing and my heart skipped a beat. It was an illustration of 3 figures of light. The first one I recognized immediately, Raziel, Elliot's guardian. The second Ariel, baby protector, holding a small beam of light in her arms. But it was the third figure that made me hold my breath. You, or at least, it was a representation of me. I was surrounded by a glowing aura, and behind me were a golden presence, greater than all others. My fingers trembled as they touched the paper. "What is this, Elliot?" He looked at me naturally, as if he was telling me something obvious. "It's you, Mom, and that is Jesus." My throat closed. "How do you know?" Elliot chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Because I saw it." I swallowed hard. "When?" "When you left. He was with you the whole time." My hands clenched the paper. "Elliot, you knew. He saw what happened to me. But what scared me most, it was how he could draw that so precisely." That same night, as I was putting the baby to sleep, Michael appeared in the bedroom door, looking restless. "Can you come here for a minute?" I nodded, placing the baby in the crib and following him into the hallway. He scratched the back of his head, looking nervous. "I know you've been different since you got back from the hospital." I tensed. "How different?" He sighed, trying to find the right words. "I don't know, but I saw you die, Katerine. I saw your heart stop, and then, out of nowhere, you came back." He swallowed hard. "And now, I'm dreaming about you." My hands got cold. "Dreaming?" Michael hesitated, then shook his head and laughed humorlessly. "He forgets. It's nonsense." I grabbed his hand before he walked away. "Tell me." He took a deep breath and looked at me with an intensity I had never seen before. "I dreamed that you were in a place full of light, and that you were looking at me." As if he wanted to tell me something. I felt a knot in my stomach. And what was I saying? Michael rubbed his face. "I don't know. But in the dream, I felt something very strong. He looked me in the eyes, that I need to believe." My heart raced. Michael has always been skeptical. He always avoided any subject related to the spiritual. But now, something was changing. And deep down, I knew that was just the beginning. The following week, the feeling of presence became even stronger. It wasn't scary, but it was constant. I could feel when Raziel was close to Elliot. I knew when Ariel was near the baby. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I felt something even bigger around me, as if the light I had seen on the other side was still surrounding me. How if Jesus was still around? I didn't see it, but I felt, and that was more than enough. One afternoon, my sister Claire came to visit us. She was one of the few people who was in the hospital while I was fighting for my life. We sat on the porch, drinking coffee while Elliot played with the baby. After a long silence, Claire sighed and looked at me with a curious gleam in her eyes. I heard Michael say that his heart stopped for more than 10 minutes. I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. She bit her lip. "And do you remember anything?" I took a deep breath, feeling my chest tighten. There was the question, the chance to share, a chance to open someone's eyes. I knew most people wouldn't believe it, but Claire has always been sensitive to the spiritual. I looked into her eyes and made a decision. I placed the cup on the table, intertwined my fingers, and said, calmly in the world, "Yes, and I need to tell you what happened. By 2 hours, I told you everything. I spoke of angels. I spoke of the battle. I spoke about Jesus and the moment of choice." Claire heard everything without interrupting. When I finished, she was pale. "Katerine." She ran her hands over her face, trying to process everything. That's unbelievable. Absent. I know." She looked at Elliot, who was playing nonchalantly. "And do you think he really sees these angels?" Before I could respond, Elliot turned and smiled at nothing. Then he looked at us and said, as if he were listening to someone, "Raziel said you'll believe it, Aunt Claire." Sooner or later, Claire stayed no air. Her face lost color, and she trembled. She looked at me again. Did he hear that just now?" I just nodded. Claire put her hand over her mouth and was silent for a long time. But then, I saw something different about her, something changing. and I knew that that conversation planted a seed, the first of many. That night, as I put my baby to sleep, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. I didn't ask for anything, just thank you for being alive, for my family, and knowing, with all the certainty of my soul, which I would never be alone again. Over the next few days, something inside me began to change. It wasn't just the certainty of what I saw and felt. It was a called, something that grew within me like an urgent need. I couldn't just go back to my routine and pretend nothing had happened. But at the same time, I didn't want to be seen as a bigot or a person who tried to impose their experience on others. So, the question that haunted me was, how could I share this truth without forcing anyone to believe it? Michael had already shown signs that he felt something different since I returned, but he was a skeptical, logical man. I knew I needed to be careful when talking about what I experienced. That night, after we put the kids to bed, I sat next to him on the bed and took a deep breath. I need to tell you something. He looked at me attentively, about what happened to me in the hospital. I saw his expression change. Katerine, you almost died. I don't know if it's a good idea to relive this now. I held his hand, but I didn't die, Michael. And there is a reason for that. He was silent, waiting, so I started counting. I talked about the light field, about Jesus, about the angels, about the spiritual battle I witnessed. He listened to me until the end, without interrupting. When I finished, he ran his hand over his face, thoughtfully. That's a lot to digest. I nodded, understanding his confusion. I don't want you to believe it just because I say it, but you feel like something has changed, don't you? He hesitated, then looked at me with a look I had never seen before. Yes, I feel it. My heart was filled with hope. Maybe he wasn't ready to accept everything yet, but a door had been opened, and I knew that it was just a matter of time. After that conversation, something happened. I started to see small signs around me. They were coincidences that didn't seem like coincidences. People who appeared at exact moments, saying phrases that answered questions that I hadn't even verbalized, dreams that carried subtle messages, but full of meaning, and above all, a deep feeling that I had a greater purpose to fulfill. But how can I do this without exposing myself too much, without sounding like I was trying to convince people of something? It was then that Elliot gave me the answer. One afternoon, while we were playing in the backyard, Elliot looked at me and said, "Mom, when are you going to tell people?" My stomach turned. Tell what? He gave me a look like he knew a lot more than I imagined. What did you see? What did you learn? My mouth went dry. Elliot, not everyone believes that. He shrugged. You don't need to believe it. You just have to count. I looked at him, not knowing what to say. That was the truth. I didn't need to convince anyone, just to share. I started slowly. First, talking to my sister Claire, who was already showing curiosity. Then, with a friend who had recently lost a son, and who, without knowing it, started telling me about how she felt his presence around her. I heard. And then, I told my experience. She cried. She said she had never talked about it with anyone because she was afraid of looking crazy. That's when I realized many people have spiritual experiences, but they are afraid to talk about them. And maybe my mission was to open this space for them. One day, while having coffee at a small bookstore in downtown Asheville, a woman I had never seen before sat down next to me. She looked at me curiously. "I'm sorry to bother you, but have you ever had a near-death experience?" My eyes widened. "How do you know?" She smiled. "You have a different glow." "I went through this too. We talked for hours." She told me that after her experience, she felt a calling to help other people understand the spiritual world. And then, she invited me. Some mothers have children who talk about angels and light, but they are afraid. I participate in a group where we share experiences like this. Would you like to come? My heart pounded. It was like something was lining up perfectly at the right time. And then, without hesitation, I replied, "Yes, I want." The following week, I went to the meeting. It was a small, intimate circle, women of different ages and stories. Some cried as they told of their children saying they talked with lights. Others shared dreams and visions they never understood. And then, my turn came. I took a deep breath, and I told all, every detail. I didn't omit anything. In the end, the silence was absolute, but I didn't feel scared. I felt peace. And then, one of the mothers whispered, "I always knew my son wasn't making it up." Another murmured, "You just gave me the answer I've been looking for years." It was at that moment that I understood. My mission was not to change anyone. Era give courage to other people to believe in what they already felt in their hearts. Era give voice to the truth. That night, I came home different. Michael saw me enter and noticed something about me. How it was. Smile softly. It was right. I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes, and then I felt it. A presence, not as a vision, but as a deep certainty. I would never be alone again. The mission I was given was not big in the sense of fame or recognition, but it was great on the spiritual plane, and it was exactly where I should be. Time passed. The weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years. My life followed a natural path. I woke up every day, took care of my children, shared happy and challenging moments with Michael, and continued my learning journey. But there was something different, something that never disappeared. I never felt alone again. My perception of the world changed forever. Not that I saw angels all the time like Elliot, but I knew when they were around. I felt their presence at the right times. When Elliot slept, he could feel Raziel standing beside the bed, like an eternal guardian. When my baby, now called Noah, smiled at nothing and babbled towards empty air, I knew that Ariel was there. And when Michael, little by little, began to open himself to faith, reading more, asking more, and one night, praying silently before going to sleep, I was sure that Jesus never stopped guiding us. One day, when Noah was 3 years old, he ran up to me with a mischievous smile on his face. "Mommy, there's a handsome young man here." My breathing caught. "What do you mean, love?" He looked to the side and smiled at nothing. "He has wings. He protects me." My heart raced. Elliot, now 8 years old, laughed when he heard this. "Oh, you started to see it too, right?" Noah nodded excitedly. Michael, who was nearby, just watched the scene silently. Then, for the first time, he looked at me with that look of someone who knew there were no more doubts. "I think I need to stop resisting this, huh?" I hugged him and whispered, "You never had to believe it for it to be real." He sighed, held my hand and said, "But now I believe." Over time, I met more and more people who had experiences like mine. Mothers who said their children talked to invisible beings. Parents who wondered if their children's imaginary friends were something more. And I always said the same thing. Listen to your children, because children know. The world teaches them to doubt, but deep down, they know the truth from the beginning. And now, I knew it too. There was a time when the unknown scared me. There was a time when I would have doubted all of this. But now, I was no longer afraid, because I knew. I knew that every day, an invisible battle was raging around us, but I also knew that the light always wins. One afternoon, I sat next to Elliot while he drew. He was already older, but he still drew angels. This time, alongside Raziel and Ariel, he drew a third figure. "Who is this?" I asked. He looked at me and smiled. "He's your guardian, Mom. You never asked his name, right?" My heart stopped. I have one?" He laughed. "Everyone has it. But you only asked about us." I touched the edge of the drawing, feeling a shiver. "What's his name?" Elliot took a pencil and wrote, in childish letters, the name below the figure. My eyes filled with tears when I read it. "Gabriel." I let out an emotional laugh. Elliot hugged me and whispered, "He takes care of you like Raziel takes care of me." I could spend years trying to explain everything I experienced, but in the end, the truth is simple. We are never alone. There is a thin veil between this world and the next, and there are angels standing, watching, protecting, guiding, waiting for us to see. I know that one day I will return to that field of light. I know I will see Jesus again. But until then, I will live without fear, because now I know the truth, and this truth set me free.